This woman becomes a better version of herself every day, and I'm proud of her for that. She loves who she is right now because she is exactly who God created her to be.
On December 11th, 2023, Las Vegas woke up to the kind of headlines that freeze your blood. A mother, her two daughters, all were found dead inside their apartment. But what the headlines didn't tell you was that this wasn't just a murder. It was a betrayal, one that had been hiding in plain sight, right behind their front door. This is the story of Schinara Patterson and the horrifying secret that no one believed until it was far too late. I remember when I first heard about the Patterson family. On the surface, they looked like any ordinary family living in Las Vegas' quiet Northwest Valley. Schinara was a 34-year-old mother who dedicated her life to her children. Her Facebook profile was filled with smiles, dance videos, and birthday celebrations. She wasn't just a mom. She was their safe place, their protector, their everything. And then there was Marvin Patterson, the husband, the stepfather. To the world, he was a hard-working man, someone who stood beside Schinara, raised her kids as his own. He coached, he disciplined, he provided. People saw them together at family cookouts, church services, football games. No one could have imagined the monster hiding underneath that polished surface. But as I dug deeper, I realized the cracks were always there. Neighbors whispered about Marvin's temper. Former friends hinted at an over-controlling nature. But you know how it is in these situations, people look the other way. They tell themselves it's not their business. But behind closed doors, something was brewing. And Schinara, she was caught right in the middle. You see, what most people didn't know was that Marvin wasn't just an ordinary man. In 2022, the facade shattered when he was arrested on a string of horrific charges. Charges that made my stomach turn the first time I read them. Multiple counts of lewdness with children under 14. Sexual assault. Kidnapping. These weren't rumors. They weren't accusations whispered in the dark. These were documented, filed, and backed by evidence. And yet, the justice system did what it does far too often. They gave him a second chance. In December 2022, despite the overwhelming charges, a judge decided Marvin deserved to await his trial from the comfort of his own home. His bail was reduced from $100,000 to just $10,000. And just like that, the man accused of the unthinkable was free. I can't lie to you. When I read that part of the court documents, I felt sick. How does a man like that get to walk back into a home with children? But that's exactly what happened. And from that moment on, the countdown to tragedy began. But here's where the story takes an even darker twist. Because Marvin wasn't just a predator. He was a ticking time bomb. And no one, not even Schinara, knew just how far he'd go to silence the people he claimed to love. As the weeks turned into months, life inside that apartment became suffocating. Family members noticed Schinara pulling away. She stopped posting as much. Friends said she looked tired, anxious, like she was carrying a weight she couldn't explain. And then, one day, she confided in a close friend. She told them she was afraid. That Marvin was watching her every move. That he was threatening her if she ever tried to leave. But Schinara was strong. Or at least she tried to be. She told herself she could protect her children, that she could keep the monster at bay until the courts caught up. She had no idea. The system had already failed her. In the days leading up to December 11th, Schinara made a decision that could have changed everything. She began secretly looking for apartments. She told her mother she wanted out, that she couldn't take the fear anymore. But Marvin, he must have sensed it. Abusers always do. They smell freedom like a predator smells blood. And that's when the nightmare escalated. Because what Schinara didn't know was that Marvin wasn't going to wait for the courts. He wasn't going to wait for his trial. He was going to deliver his own verdict. And he was going to make sure no one walked away. That morning, Schinara's neighbors would later recall hearing what they thought were loud bangs. But in Las Vegas, loud noises weren't exactly uncommon. It wasn't until the police arrived that the truth spilled out into the open like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Inside that apartment lay Schinara Patterson. her 14-year-old stepdaughter, Kezia Cohn, her 6-year-old daughter, Schinara Patterson. All of them shot execution style. But the tragedy didn't end there. Because in the corner of that apartment, still clinging to life, was an 11-year-old boy. Derek, Schinara's son, barely breathing, barely alive. And as paramedics fought to save him, the world outside stood still. Thank you so much for joining me today to hear the story of Schinara Patterson and her children. If you find value in these stories and want to help keep their memories alive, please consider subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others who need to hear it. Your support means the world and helps bring more important stories like this to light. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Before we continue, let's take a step back. Let's understand who Schinara Patterson was. Because behind the headlines, behind the crime scene tape, there was a woman, a mother, and she was so much more than a victim. Schinara Patterson was the kind of woman who lit up every room she walked into. She had that natural warmth, the kind that made you feel like family, even if you'd only just met her. People described her as vibrant, strong-willed, and fiercely protective of her children. She wasn't just raising them. She was building them into people who would know love, resilience, and faith. Her social media was filled with snapshots of joy, birthday parties with balloons crowding the ceilings, silly dance videos in the kitchen, Sunday mornings at church, her kids dressed in their best. To the outside world, they looked like the kind of family you'd envy. The perfect family image. She was a mother of 4, blending her love for all of them into one household. There was Derek, her shy, gentle son. Zamira, the youngest, whose laughter could brighten the darkest days. Kezia, Marvin's daughter from a previous relationship, but Schinara raised her like her own. They weren't perfect, but they were whole. And that's all Schinara ever wanted. I remember scrolling through her Facebook posts. One stuck with me. She wrote, "My babies are my reason. No matter how hard life gets, they'll always have me." She meant every word. And maybe that's what makes what happened next even harder to swallow. Because while Schinara built a world of love inside those walls, there was someone else, building something much darker. To neighbors, Marvin Patterson was the picture of the devoted stepfather. He coached Little League. He bought Christmas gifts. From the outside, it looked like he had stepped up when others wouldn't. If you looked closely, if you dared to ask the right questions, you'd see the cracks were already forming. There were whispers, stories no one wanted to believe, rumors about Marvin's controlling ways, his explosive temper behind closed doors. He monitored Schinara's every move, controlled who she spoke to, made sure the walls around her world kept tightening until there was barely any room left to breathe. Family members would later say they saw the change in her, how she smiled less in photos, how her once playful posts turned into silent scrolls, how she started pulling away from the people who loved her most. But no one confronted Marvin. Not directly. He was the kind of man people didn't cross. And that's what predators like him rely on. Silence. Complacency. The fear of stirring the pot. But what no one outside that home knew was that Marvin Patterson had a past far darker than anyone dared to imagine. A past that was about to explode into the present. And when it did, the whole world would be forced to see the truth they had ignored for far too long. They say evil doesn't just appear overnight. It festers. It hides behind masks of normalcy, blending into family dinners, school runs, and Sunday services. And by the time anyone sees it for what it is, it's already too late. For Schinara, the man she once believed to be her protector was slowly becoming her captor. Marvin's control went beyond arguments or jealousy. It was suffocating. He isolated her from family and friends. He controlled the finances, the phones, even the locks on the doors. What started as subtle possessiveness had become an iron grip on her entire life. I've seen this pattern before, but in Schinara's case, there was something even more disturbing. Marvin had a criminal history, a past riddled with domestic violence, intimidation, and even threats against previous partners. But somehow, those records didn't stop him from rebuilding his life, finding a new woman to manipulate. And no one mourned Schinara. Or maybe she thought she could change him. We'll never know. Behind the walls of their Las Vegas home, the Patterson household became a ticking time bomb. Neighbors heard arguments. Family noticed bruises that Schinara brushed off as accidents. But like so many victims, she wore her pain like armor, convincing herself and the world that she had everything under control. But control was never hers. It was Marvin's. And while the outside world scrolled past her smiling selfies, inside that house, Marvin was spiraling, becoming paranoid, possessive, violent. He believed Schinara was cheating, accused her of betraying him, checked her phone, tracked her every move. Until one day, the man who once promised to be a father to her children began threatening to take them away from her. There's a moment in every story where the tension becomes unbearable. And for Schinara, that moment was approaching fast. She tried to leave twice, but like many victims, she was pulled back. Marvin would apologize, promise to change, shower her with gifts. The cycle of abuse spun faster and faster, and no one could stop it. Then came the twist no one saw coming. In early December, Schinara confided in a close friend. She said Marvin's threats were getting worse, that he'd been talking about killing her and the kids. But when her friend begged her to call the police, Schinara hesitated. She was scared that no one would believe her, scared that calling the cops would only make things worse. It's a decision that haunts this story, because what if she had? What if someone had stepped in sooner? Would Schinara and her children still be alive? But no one intervened, and the darkness inside Marvin, it was about to consume them all. December 11th, 2023, began like any other day for the residents of the Loretto and Palacio apartments in Las Vegas. Children rushed through morning routines, parents prepared for work, and the rhythm of daily life moved forward without hesitation. But for Schinara Patterson and her children, the world inside apartment 304 was teetering on the edge of something unspeakable. The truth is, no one on the outside suspected a thing. To the neighbors, it was just another December morning. Yet inside those four walls, the clock was ticking toward a horrific fate. The first signs of horror came not with screams, but with the sudden crack of gunfire. It shattered the stillness like an earthquake, sending neighbors scrambling for safety, dialing 911 in panic. The dispatcher's voice shook as terrified callers described the sounds of chaos pouring from the apartment. Police officers arrived within minutes, but by then, the damage had already been done. The officers' body cameras captured what words could barely describe. They entered cautiously, weapons drawn, stepping over shattered glass and splintered wood. The scene awaiting them inside was one of unfiltered carnage. In the narrow hallway, Schinara Patterson lay motionless, her body twisted unnaturally beside her son, Kizia. Both had been shot at close range, their lives stolen in a moment of brutal finality. In the adjacent bedroom, Schinara was found sprawled across her bed, her young life extinguished in a place where she should have felt safe. It was a massacre, the kind that rips through a community like wildfire, leaving only questions in its wake. But amidst the devastation, a sliver of life remained. Officers discovered Derek, Schinara's youngest child, critically wounded but still breathing. He had been shot in the face, his tiny body trembling as he fought to hold on. The officers moved quickly, cradling him, offering the only comfort they could in that moment of unspeakable trauma. Even as paramedics rushed him to the hospital, the echoes of what had happened inside that apartment refused to fade. What made the horror even more devastating was what was missing: Marvin Patterson. He was gone, vanished, leaving behind the wreckage of the family he once called his own. The man who had sworn to protect them had become the architect of their destruction, and now he was on the run. But the lingering question haunted everyone. Why? Why would a man do this to the very people who once trusted him, loved him, and saw him as family? The truth, as it would soon be uncovered, was far more twisted than anyone could have predicted. The motives behind Marvin Patterson's monstrous actions weren't simply rage or jealousy. They were rooted in a darkness that had been growing for years, hidden behind the facade of a father figure, a partner, a protector. And the most devastating part? The signs were always there. The warnings were loud. But the world chose to look away. No one wanted to believe that a man like Marvin could be capable of something like this. By the time they realized the truth, it was already far too late. In the days that followed the massacre, Las Vegas was gripped by a suffocating sense of grief, but that grief quickly boiled into rage. It wasn't just anger toward Marvin Patterson, though his face had become the symbol of betrayal and evil. It was anger at a system that had every chance to stop him but chose not to. As the details unfolded, the city learned that this wasn't an isolated act of violence by a man who simply snapped. This was the culmination of a system's repeated failures. I sat through hours of interviews, read through court documents, and listened to the raw, trembling voices of family members who would never see their loved ones again. Schinara's mother, in particular, broke me. Her words weren't rehearsed or polished for the cameras. They were the aching cries of a mother who had lost not only her daughter, but her grandchildren. She spoke about the countless nights Schinara had called her, fearful, worried, sensing that Marvin was spiraling. But every time she tried to get help, she was told to wait, to let the courts do their job, to trust the process. But the process had failed them. The public learned that Marvin Patterson had been arrested in 2022 on multiple charges of child sexual abuse. Charges that should have kept him behind bars, away from children, away from Schinara. Instead, against the protests of prosecutors and victim advocates, his bail was lowered, allowing him to walk free. It wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't a technicality. It was a choice that cost lives. The community's response was immediate and fierce. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. Candlelight vigils turned into rallies demanding accountability. Mothers, fathers, teachers, neighbors, they all gathered, their candles flickering in the cold December nights, their chants echoing into the darkness. They weren't just mourning Schinara and her children. They were mourning a broken system that allowed predators to slip through the cracks again and again. One mother, holding a photo of Kezia at a vigil, said through tears, if Marvin had been behind bars, they would still be alive today. That sentence hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. And she was right. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a system-sanctioned failure. Every safeguard that should have protected Schinara's family had been bypassed, ignored, or treated with apathy. But as the city burned with anger and grief, Marvin Patterson was still out there, still running, still breathing free air while the family he destroyed was being lowered into the ground. And the truth of where he had gone was about to shake the city even harder. For 4 agonizing days, Marvin Patterson vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. Las Vegas police launched an all-out manhunt, their faces grim, their resolve hardened. The city that never sleeps became a city on edge. Every alley, every motel, every stretch of desert was combed through with relentless urgency. But as hours turned into days, the fear grew heavier. Marvin could be anywhere. He could be hiding in plain sight. He could be preparing to hurt someone else. I couldn't help but think about Derek, the only survivor, lying in a hospital bed, his face scarred forever by the man he once called family. Was Marvin still out there, watching news reports, listening to the cries of a city he had terrorized? Was he proud of the pain he caused, or was he running from it? These were the thoughts that kept the city awake at night. The manhunt stretched beyond city limits, triggering alerts across state lines. Marvin's face was plastered on billboards, flashed across social media, and pinned to every corner of the internet. But for days, there was nothing. No sightings. No leads. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. That is, until the morning of December 15th, when a single phone call changed everything. A tip came in from the outskirts of Las Vegas. A vigilant citizen had spotted a man matching Marvin's description lurking near an abandoned shopping plaza, appearing disheveled, paranoid, and desperate. Officers responded with precision, surrounding the area with SWAT teams and K-9 units. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every officer knew who they were hunting, and they knew what he was capable of. When they found him, Marvin didn't go out in a blaze of gunfire like many expected. There was no grand showdown, no last stand. Instead, they found him hiding behind a dumpster, curled into himself like a coward, shivering in the cold. The man who had unleashed terror upon his own family now whimpered as he was handcuffed, his facade of power crumbling under the weight of his own actions. But the arrest didn't bring the relief everyone expected. The damage had already been done. No courtroom sentence could undo what Marvin had stolen. No headline could ease the nightmares left behind. As they led him away, cameras captured the hollow look in his eyes, a man stripped of any humanity, a ghost of the father he pretended to be. In that moment, the city felt a fleeting sense of justice. Marvin Patterson was finally behind bars, where he belonged. But beneath that relief lurked the bitter truth. It had taken the lives of 3 innocent people, the destruction of a family, and the cries of an entire community for the system to finally cage the monster it had once released. And as I stood watching the footage of his arrest, I couldn't help but think, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much deeper reckoning. Let's be clear, Marvin Patterson was facing child sexual abuse charges because of his own actions. But instead of owning up to what he did, he twisted the narrative in his head. He blamed Schinara. He saw her as the reason he was arrested, the reason he had a $100,000 bond hanging over his head. In his mind, she had betrayed him by standing up for her children. That bond became a symbol of his anger. And in the most cowardly way, he chose to punish her for his own crimes. The trial of Marvin Patterson was one of the most closely watched cases in Las Vegas history. From the moment he was brought into the courtroom, shackled and silent, the weight of his crimes hung heavily over every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal professionals, but with family members, survivors, and a community desperate for justice. Witnesses took the stand one by one, recounting the details of Marvin's abusive past, the warnings that had been ignored, and the devastating impact his actions had on Schinara and her children. Prosecutors laid bare the horrifying truth behind the facade of a father figure. They revealed the disturbing court records from 2022, evidence that Marvin had been a danger long before the tragedy unfolded. Each testimony was a painful reminder of lives lost and futures stolen. Marvin, for the most part, remained cold and unrepentant. There were no tears, no apologies, only the hollow stare of a man who had severed all ties to his humanity. The defense tried to paint a different picture, but the overwhelming evidence left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge pronounced the sentence, it felt like a small moment of justice in a story marked by so much pain. Marvin Patterson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a sentence designed to ensure he would never harm another family again. But for those who loved Schinara and her children, no punishment could ever bring them back. Outside the courthouse, emotions ran high. Schinara's mother spoke with a voice heavy with sorrow but strengthened by resolve. "This doesn't bring them back," she said, "but it means no one else will suffer the way we did." The community echoed her sentiment. They vowed to hold the system accountable, to demand changes that would prevent another tragedy like this one. Yet, as the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds dispersed, the silence returned. The silence of an empty home, the silence left behind by voices that would never speak again. Derek, now healing slowly from his injuries, faced a future forever marked by the shadow of that day. The legacy of Schinara Patterson and her children was one of love and loss, courage and heartbreak. In the end, the story of Schinara Patterson is not just a tale of tragedy. It is a call to action, a stark reminder that behind every headline is a human life, fragile and precious, and that the failures of a system can have consequences too terrible to ignore. The question remains, how many more families will be lost before we truly learn to listen? Before I tell you goodbye, I want to share something personal. I never met Schinara Patterson. I never held her hand or heard her laugh. I never played with Kezia or felt the warmth of little Zimira's smile in person. But after spending time with their story, their lives, and their heartbreak, I feel like I owe them something. I owe them my voice, my memory, my promise that they will not be forgotten. Because every name matters. Every story deserves to be told. In this world, it's easy for tragedies like this to slip away into the shadows, swallowed by headlines that fade and forgotten by the rush of the next big news. But Schinara, Kezia, and Zimira deserve to be more than just a tragic headline. They deserve to be remembered as the people they were, loved, cherished, and stolen from too soon. So today, I ask you to say their names. Let their names echo in your mind and your heart. Let them be louder than the silence forced upon them. And if their story moves you, share it. Speak it. Let it remind us all how fragile life is, how urgent it is to protect the innocent, and how important it is to demand better from the systems that are meant to keep us safe. As we close this chapter, may their story live on, louder and clearer than ever before, because they are never forgotten, and as long as we remember, they will never truly be gone.